Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Turning Pages, the podcast that celebrates African literature. My name is Vuvu Vena. Today we are in Zambia, visiting Zambia and a few other countries with Natasha Omokhodion-Kalulu Banda as we chat with her about her debut novel, No Be From Hia. We are of a folklore heritage. We were conceived in the womb of beautiful words, birthed into a captivating world that we've spent eternity trying to name, tell, retell, and paint. Wrapped and cradled in stories, inzomi namabali. Our words create worlds. They transport, they mirror, they convict, they give lashings and hugs. They create and can never be undone. To hide between the pages of a book is to find pieces of yourself before you even were. Welcome to Turning Pages, the podcast that celebrates African literature from the continent and the diaspora. I'm your host, Vuvu Vena. Just to read you a bit about Natasha as is written in her debut, Natasha Omokhodion-Kalulu Banda is a UK-born Zambian of Nigerian and Jamaican heritage who lives in Lusaka. She is married and has 3 children. She has been published in the African Women Writers e-publication anthology, Different Shades of a Feminine Mind, and featured on AfricanWriter.com for a story To Hear is Human, To Forgive is Design. She has been published in Short Story Day Africa, Hotel Africa. The manuscript of her novel No Be From Hia was selected as a Grey Wolf Africa Prize finalist in 2019. The blurb of No Be From Hia reads, meet the Oyamides and the Kombes, Zambian, Nigerian, Jamaican powerhouse families brought together during the post-colonial migration of the 1960s to the UK and later separated by death, divorce and betrayal. Scattered between London, Lusaka and Lagos, only the new generation can save this family. Maggie Oyamide and Bupe Kombe are cousins on either side of the world who couldn't be more different. Zambian Nigerian and Zambian Jamaican both yearn for their disbanded family to reunite. When Bupe leaves Brixton to go to secondary school in Zambia, she brings light and disorder to Maggie's world. However, the girls are hindered by dark family secrets such as the mysterious death of their late grandmother and Maggie's missing Nigerian father. From the blazing streets of Brixton riots to multi-party elections in Zambia, to the glitzy Independence Day celebration and adventurous nightclubs in Lagos, this heartwarming story breathes life into the modern-day result of post-colonial Africa and 20th century migration as it follows 2 ordinary girls trying to find their identity and reunite their family. Thank you so very much for joining us, Natasha. Today we are with Natasha Omokhodion-Kalulu Banda, the author of No Be From Hia, Zambian author. The book was published last year by Blackbird Books, and she's joining us to discuss with us what the book is about and some of the themes that surround this book.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us. Vuvu, thank you so much for having me. It's so exciting to be here. Our podcast is growing. It's so organic and the words are beautiful. And I love the intro, by the way. I played over and over again. So thank you so much for having me and for reading No Be From Hia. And to everyone who's out there, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. So the first question was, with your kind of background and your kind of heritage, how did your own upbringing and family structure influence the contents of this book?
Okay. So as I said earlier, I'm Zambian. I'm based in Zambia. But my heritage also is a bit there's a bit of extra things there because my dad is Nigerian and Jamaican. His dad was Nigerian, his mother was Jamaican, and my mother is Zambian. And also not just Zambian, she's from the village in which I've set the book. So I think just that, that combination of cultures definitely had a shaping or some kind of influence on me, I think, in my formative years. And I don't think you realize it when you're a kid. You sort of think about it only later, when you wonder why certain foods or flavors from these particular places are familiar to you. And yeah, like they were all different voices. Like, my grandmother was speaking a Jamaican voice. My other grandmother would speak to me in Bemba and things like that. So it was only later as an adult, I think, and also just before I started writing this book, that I kept thinking about, just those, kids who are brought up in multicultural families or settings, I think, so to speak. And I started to think about writing the book based on that.
And do you think that these kids that grow up in those kind of settings have an issue identifying a solid structure or place to call home, or a culture that they can affiliate with, because they've got all these multiple cultures at play in their lives?
But you will have like perhaps a dissonance of maybe wanting to align with, your other half or a third or whatever, but you just never maybe spent as much time there or can't speak the language. And that could even be intra. It can be just like intra, like maybe you can be from 3 different tribes, but from one country. You know what I mean? So maybe you've got a mom who's Tswana and a father who's Zulu, but you've spent more time in one place, maybe even somewhere completely arbitrary to those two things. So I think children who are products of that, and also of maybe living somewhere else or migrating, whatever the reason is, will definitely have to, or usually have to, go through that sort of self-interrogation. And the question of home will sort of, will always be near, always lingering.
That's very true. And the thing is, I think a lot of Black culture does put that emphasis on which structure, specifically like structure. Like, I know that when I talk about home, I'm Xhosa, right? My parents were both Xhosa. But when I talk about home, I talk about my dad's home, not even my home, my dad's home. So when my dad was brought up, where his father and mother created a home. But when I talk about my mother's, like my maternal grandparents' house, it's my grandparents' house. It's not home. So if I say I'm going home, everyone assumes that I'm going to my dad's, my paternal side of the family, if that makes sense.
But did you struggle with that, or was it just something that was it?
I think that in my culture, it's a norm. It's normal, right? It's not something that anybody, it applies to everybody within the culture. So it's not something that screams at you until you interact with other people and you want to question the fact, because I can't even call my own house a home. So when I say I'm going home, or when I say to my kids, we're going home, we're going to my dad's house, that's home,
Oh, that is profound. That is really, really interesting. But in my culture, our culture on my mother's side, we are matrilineal.
Okay.
So in terms of heritage, a child will belong to a mother. Okay. But of course, in my father's side, we're patrilineal. So like you're saying, it's all have some influence on that.
And it's very interesting because I think even in the conversation that I was having with you, I said one of the most interesting, or around the book, is that I said one of the most interesting things for me was this idea of home. And perhaps it's also influenced, it's interesting to me because it's also influenced by that kind of background, right? That home will always be, you have to gravitate to the, it's as if it's the point of origin, or your point where you can trace back your origin. And your origin is, especially like you're saying, if it's a patriarchal society of sort, your point of origin is always going to be traced back to your dad.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I was wondering, would you say that belonging, right, going back to this idea of home, right, would you say we belong to places, as in, are we from anywhere, going back to the title of your book? Or would you say that we belong to people, tribes, communities?
Wow, that is a very loaded question, and I love that you've asked it. I think it's a combination and really a personal choice or decision. I mean, I don't think you can force someone to belong somewhere. And sometimes people maybe will really have this need, this really urgent need to belong to, and that, as you're saying, I think especially now the world is, it would be a very, I don't think we could limit it to just geographies, for instance. Definitely it's, who's your tribe is also more, who shares the same ideas as you, who shares the same morals, not necessarily where your umbilical cord physically comes from. So I think sense of belonging really is a personal decision or feeling, or, I mean, home is home, it's like, you say, no, but you must belong here because of X, Y, Z. I just sort of transcended, those kind of pigeonholes, and it really is just what is in the heart. And sometimes it takes searching to do, And sometimes it's like you just know daddy's home is home for me. So, it's a really personal thing.
And it can be, from what you're saying, I'm gathering that you're saying it can be a place and it can be a person. So it can be people and a place that you can identify as home. It's not either or.
Yes, or ideas or values, value systems, so to speak. So definitely, I think home and belonging is a very wide concept, and again, very personable to every individual.
That's true. So there's a strong commentary on the impact of displacement in the book, right? Displacement meaning people that are living in geographical areas that are not where they were born or that are not of their heritage. So you've got your Jamaicans living in the UK, you've got your Zambians living in the UK, you've got some of your Nigerians there as well. But for as long as history records, Black people have enjoyed varying forms of displacement in varying levels of intensity. Will we ever find a place where these strange places that we find ourselves in belong to us? Because I felt that the characters that were displaced in this book were not really comfortable in the places that they were not their own. We can even talk to the grandmother, Maggie's grandmother, who now ended her life in Nigeria as a Jamaican. Yeah. She's traveled throughout these different cultures and places, but she still had that longing for the place of her origin.
Yeah. Wow, again, I think that is really highly personable and down to individual journeys, It would be really difficult just to like place everyone, because we all originally from Africa, and say we would all feel at home in such a place or in, such a line of thought. I think we're all individually unique, and I think it's an evolving sort of dynamic thing, migration. I actually wonder what it's going to look like in the next 20 to 30 years. So to say that we'll have one place that is one, I'm really not sure. I don't think it's really my place to say that. And again, I think it really goes back to that individual journey and that individual attachment to what is home for someone, for a person, no matter where they're from.
So would you say that for your specific, if you bring it back to your specific characters, right? And in this case, I'm looking specifically at Bupe, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly.
Yeah, Bupe, perfect. You said every name.
And Bupe and Maggie's paternal grandmother, right? These two characters did have a sense of feeling, okay, let's take Bupe, for example. When she came to Zambia, she felt like she can finally, I feel like she felt like she could finally become, right? And that was not the same person that she was in London. We can bring in the family dynamics in London as well, maybe as an explanation. But there was this sense of wanting to go back home for her to be able to root herself in something and to take a stand for herself. And then we look at this elderly character who, even in her elderly years, after having left Jamaica for probably more than 2 decades, right, still has this longing and this understanding and of the culture, the foods, the whatever. She still wants a bit of home. So if we look at these specific characters, would we say that the displacement conversation is something that they were grappling with? And to
Absolutely.
what extent?
Absolutely. I think almost everyone is grappling with displacement in this book. In their own degrees, varying degrees. And that includes even, everyone from Wupe's dad, he couldn't talk about going home, but he wanted to go home. If you look at her uncle, Cavasso, he had his reasons why. So I think every character, yes, I wanted to explore the theme of displacement through all these individual prisms or perspectives, so to say. And all of them for their own different reasons, how they did, why they chose to stay where they did. So for instance, as you're saying, Maggie's maternal grandmother, it was love. First migration and then love kept her away from going back home. And then you've got, okay, we're not going to give it, but definitely, and Maggie in her own way, needed to go back to Nigeria in order to meet that innate need that she felt, by not being with her one half. So yes, I feel like all these characters were, and Wupe as well. Wupe in the end gets to come back home, but as we said in the beginning, she didn't know where home was because she's sort of like, but where do I belong? But her coming home could be seen in two ways. I think it sort of empowered her, but it also disabled her because all of a sudden she's like, oh my gosh, you know, there's that much more that I'm from or that I belong to. And I think it kind of made her a bit scared to make any moves thereafter. But, I think, yeah, it was fun to explore displacement through these characters. So
Yeah.
I hope it's great to hear that you felt that as well, I think.
And I absolutely love stories that are based on something that almost everybody can latch onto, right? And I see the fundamental or the base of the story is on family, right?
Yeah.
This story cannot, there's no story without the family structure that you have created here. And I was wondering, what does family mean to you before we go into the conflicts within this specific family, but family to you specifically as Tash, as the writer, trying to bring these people together? What does family mean to you?
So I think, as you rightfully said, family is such a universal concept still, but I also believe families come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and philosophies. So when I say, for me, the family is important, I mean it in all its beautiful, different arrangements of what we call family. And I think it is important, family, I think it always will be. And for this particular book, I think, I think family was and is everything. And using the book to show also what can happen, sort of the cause and effect between generations, I think was something that I really wanted to come out. And how you can have a chasm, 40, 50 years ago that unresolved can sort of like still fracture through the rest of the generations until it's either addressed or resolved. Or so I do believe in family. I love family. The way people love love, I love family. And I think ultimately exploring a family like this was just a way to reflect also the changing societies, I think, since just post-independence going forward, and to sort of show what the macro effects have on the micro, on the individual, on the family as a unit, and the individuals that consists of. So yeah, so I for me, family is very important. Again, it comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and No Be From Hia was just one tiny aspect of the range we have in this world.
And what I liked about this specific family is that each individual had their own, let's say, internal conflicts, but you didn't blur them into this family. You still managed to see Bupe as Bupe. You saw Maggie as Maggie. You saw Stella as Stella, having grappled with their own individual issues, but you also had a way of bringing them together as a unit. And I think that's a clear reflection of what family is. Usually we think that just because we carry the same name, we have to merge into this oneness somehow, right? But the fact that you could celebrate the flaws and the strengths of each of these individual characters who make up this family, even the dad, was quite beautiful to watch as you were reading it. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, thank you, Vuvu. Thank you very much.
So with Africa being largely patriarchal, we've touched a little bit about this, right? Why did you choose to amplify the matriarch in this family and then choose her granddaughters as the channel in which to tell the story?
To be really honest, I don't know if I chose it or they came. I think they chose me. I think the girls chose me. But when I first started writing this story, it came to me like the first voice that came to me was grandmother Margaret. And it came hard and fast. And I still remember that afternoon, I just got up and just had to begin. I think the first scene when she's, that's the one that anchored everything. And that's the one that really kept coming back to me. So I will say now that grandmother Margaret, who again was the matriarch, really she started this story off, so I couldn't do it any other way. And then I think by exploring, Grandpa Charles was quite the patriarch, especially in that, in a reflection of that time where what he says goes. You know, if he tells his son, you're not to tell anyone, that's what it was. There was no in betweens, you know. Although he also goes on his own journey, I like to think. But, you know, I think it is true. I think I gave way more stage to the ladies in the story. But it was really important, I think, starting with Grandma Margaret, to sort of explore the role. I know she doesn't take center stage much in terms of scenic, like seeing her, but she's always there. The intention was that she's always there because, again, for me, she was the device that was necessary to use her accident to carry through the line, this thread that's haunting these girls many generations later, or 2 generations later. But the reason why still also goes back to her relationship with this patriarch of a father. So I think it was exploring that relationship. And the girls, it was important that the girls, the granddaughters, were sort of a reflection of her. They're named after her. They are of her. Like, even though she's gone, they are still her descendants. They are still connected to her. And because of her, they are connected to each other. So it was really just important to have her as the center thread because she did begin the story. And there are many grandmother Margarets who have not been given voice in our histories, you know. And for me, on a practical level, which was another motivation when writing this, was going to a funeral, my grandmother's funeral. All our lives we had known that grandfather had played the role of freedom fighter and, you know, saved the country and so on. But only when she died did someone say, did now everyone stand up and say, actually in her own right was a freedom fighter, not a freedom fighter's wife. She was a freedom fighter. And that for me was really profound. And when writing Grandmother Margaret and everything else that came with it, I really necessary to give voice back to those women who were fine to say, no, I'm the wife of him. Yes, I supported him, but I'm not going to go and be talk about it. But their role must, you know, I felt should be recognized.
Which brings me to this question. Do you think that the African woman in that era, as well as today, is aware of her power and the generational impact of the life she chooses to live now?
I think the concept of woman's power or their power is very complex. And I think it would be unfair to say that they were not aware of their. I think it's just how they chose to use their power. And sometimes power is staying put and saying this family will survive. You know, I mean, I'm just saying there's a different range of what people exhibit as power. And definitely in the 40s, it was very different to what it is to be a woman now than it was then. So I feel like it's just very different contexts and very different times. We did have some women in those days who were what's the word? Who did exhibit again their power. I think they're all powerful, but everyone chose to do it in a way they did. Some fought against the constraints of society outwardly, and some did it more quietly. So I don't think it's my place to sort of judge what they did at that time within the constraints and what they had to. But I do feel like someone like Grandmother Margaret was a reflection of her time, and yeah, sort of embodies the context of what was expected in the sense of power, you know, in that time was, or what she wanted, what motivated her was more to keep a family together. So yeah, that.
And like you're saying, that is a power on its own, because when I watched her looking for her husband during that time, I asked myself, how many women were left behind because the men went to find jobs elsewhere and stayed put and waited? So it says something about the kind of caliber of woman that Grandma Margaret was. Not to say the women that stayed were not strong women, because for you to be able to stay and say you are married to a man that you see once in a blue moon, that is also, it takes strength to do that. But her defiance and her rebellion, I think, was a reflection of the kind of woman that you were portraying in that character, that could then have Bupe and Maggie as grandchildren, and Stella as a daughter. For me, I felt like those did flow very well together.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So going back to this thing of women in society, right? And we take the two characters, Grandma Margaret as well as Fabiola now, right? So is our conformity to society, to societies that belittle us as women, right? Instrumental in how we navigate the relationships that we have with other women. Because if you take, I'm talking about the juxtaposition between Maggie and Bupe's relationship and Fabiola, if you can call it a relationship, Fabiola and Margaret's relationship, right? Here are two women who were able to, despite their differences and despite their different interests in life, form a friendship, form a bond. Yes, they have a bond because they are family, but could still form a bond of friendship above their bond of blood, right? And then here are two women in a tumultuous time, right, finding each other under this man, Uncle Charles, and still acting out a friendship that isn't there, because inevitably is the thing that destroys the one.
True.
Mm.
Wow. I never really considered it a juxtaposition. And now that you put it so eloquently, thank you very much. But I do think, between Fabiola and Grandmother Margaret, you don't really, there is a tension. There's an obvious tension. And there is there's a down spiral for Grandmother Margaret because of Fabiola's relationship with Grandpa Charles. But like you're saying, it's weirdly, there's still a mutual respect of each other's space. And I think a few times you sort of see them together. They're brought together in different scenarios. But as you say, in their own way, even as women, even though they're on opposite ends of a spectrum, fighting for the same thing, they didn't necessarily have to belittle each other or So again, I think also it was a complex one. It was complex.
And
but I don't think I've answered your question.
No, but I hear where you're going, because for me the interest there is how the times that we live in, right, not determine, but kind of lure us into how we navigate our relationships with each other, but especially as women, right? Because I can't speak for today, but I doubt that a Fabiola would walk into a Margaret's house with such gusto today. Do you get what I'm trying to say? And exactly. And who are you protecting? Do you get what I'm trying to say? In that scenario, is it yourself or this person that has brought the two of you together in this scenario? So I found that that commentary about female relationships, even when we talk about, so there's we'll call it sibling relationship between Maggie and Bupe. We'll call it the mother-daughter relationship between Maggie and Stella. And then we'll call it the woman in society relationship between Margaret and Fabiola. And I think there's a lot that is being said that is true to relationships that women experience in society through these three different scenarios. So I wanted to understand then so you're saying you were not aware, but I was wondering if there was an actual messaging there, because I feel the way that Bupe and Maggie carry each other is something that I think a lot of women desire in society when they have relationships, even sisters in actual like bloodlines. It's something that they desire because they can accept that as different as they are, because Bupe is far removed from what a Maggie is, but somehow they know how to make life work together, and they know how to love past each other's differences.
Absolutely. I think so. I think so. And also, I mean, look, it's lots of threads of woman love, I think, because you still have Whooper's grandma, you've got her mom. I mean, you've got Auntie Stella is different, but she still loves Maggie. I don't think she loves her any less just because she doesn't exhibit your sort of Western expectation of what love is supposed to look like. So, yeah, I think it's definitely exploring different ways of that thread of support, motherhood, sistership, grandmothers and granddaughters, dead or alive, how at the end of the day it all weaves together so we can community, that sense of uplifting, no matter how different we are. And with Pope and Maggie, I think specifically they in all of their displacement, they really, really honestly had such a longing for each other. And they sort of were not complete until they were together. So yeah, I think it is supposed to be reflective of what that ideally would be, as you say, even in blood relationships, even in friendships, mentorships, our superheroes. We're constantly looking for our superheroes in our lives. So it was supposed to reflect that.
And part of the story also talks to the topic of parenting, right? I look at Stella specifically, right? And I think that she is conflicted with a lot of things, right? There's the marriage issue that didn't work out. But I think the biggest thing in her life is trying to pay penance for this guilt that she feels about her relationship with her mom. And in doing that, she misses out on mothering herself, because it's as though, how sometimes in Christianity you have to work your sins away. There's this concept of you have to work to be able to be clean of whatever it is that you have done wrong. I feel like the minute she realized that there's something that she missed in her interaction with her mom, and that she was so guilty about, she tried to wash her guilt away by doing certain things. And I wonder if that is also something that descendants of stalwarts, struggle heroes, etc., feel when because surely there must be a time where there's defiance, right? What are you doing all of this for? Who do you think you are? What about us? Blah, blah, blah. And then when you mature into it, you probably think, okay, now that I understand, am I going to replicate who this person was, or am I going to outdo who they were, or am I just going to continue shunning what I thought I lacked because they chose this path?
Wow, that is a very, very insightful observation. I definitely agree with you that I think Stella definitely was struggling with her own, she had her own ghosts, as you say, with what happened with her husband. It estranged her from her brother, her dad, and her, it took a while to get back. But as you say, most of all, her mom, and she was not there for her to sort of resolve that issue or that pain. And absolutely, I mean, you can see it roll into her relationship with Maggie. With regards to descendants of, as you're saying, stalwart freedom fighters, and they've seen, and they've got these big shoes to fill. Definitely, I think it was very rare that there would be no sort of effects on the next generation. And you can see those in all kinds of ways. You've got the ones who really go wild, and then you've got the ones who, as you say, really want to just get it right and, sort of fill those shoes. So again, it's such a wide range in between. But what definitely, for me, what I think stays consistent is that there's definitely sort of like a ripple effect from all of that. In those days, the sacrifices they had to watch, sometimes the punishments or the scrutiny or whatever it was, it definitely had a ripple effect. So I think it was a product of all of that combined. So hence making her the mother she was. She was, yeah.
And for me, it also speaks to how I think we parent from what we see when we're growing up, right? How we are parented sometimes. So we either parent as a replication or as a place of I'm trying to improve what situation I was in, or from a place of I'm so scared that I don't want to become A, B, C, and D, right? So we do parent from experience, even if it's an experience. And parenting for me is not just about you've given birth, because Uncle Kabaso is also a parent, a very large prominent part in Mupe's life as a parent, right? So you, not that you have biologically given birth, but then how you bring up the next generation is very much dependent on what your experience of life is. And it's either we're gonna act from places of fear, or we're gonna act from places of nurturing and being able to bring out that typical understanding of what parenting should be.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that came out very strongly in Stella's character. Talking about Uncle Kabaso, in this era that we're in, right? Everybody's always talking about representation. I'm one who's just gotten into queer literature as well, which I'm really enjoying, because I think that even the style of writing, either by queer authors or of queer characters in books, is always so fascinating to me. Was it something that you had always known you'd include in your literature, having a queer character? Or was it something that you looked at this, because it's not typical that a queer character would be the product of this kind of family, right?
Yeah. Well, when I made this family, or rather when this family came to me, and really it did come to me, like as I said, I started with Grandmama Margaret. Kabaso, Charles, and Stella were clear. It was clear. So I don't think I went out of my way to say I have to include someone who, I go looking for Kabaso. Kabaso was there. But I did also want the family to sort of reflect, what the families are like. And it's not uncommon, it's not uncommon at all. But yeah, I honestly just met him as a character. In fact, I think the first time I was writing it, he was small. The first time I was writing it, he was my first rendition of the book was when his mom was taking him to boarding school. And I think it was more about that than it was about making sure that he was queer. Where I come from, it's still not, what's the word? It's still criminalized. But a lot of queer people in our society. So yes, Kabaso came to me, but yes, it was also important to include him because it's not uncommon, like I'm saying. So I don't think it's right to just pretend. And again, I'm really also enjoying a lot of queer literature. And Akwaeke's last one, The Death of Vivek Oji, for me, just like gripped me. Like, it's just amazing. Also to finally maybe like have a window, right, into what it's like, to also empathize and know, like, wow, that's what the experience is like, like with characters like Vivek. It's, for me, up to now, he's still with me. It's really profound. So back to Kabaso, I didn't go out intentionally to say, oh, this is what I want to do. He really was part of that family, and for me reflected, I think, society. Yeah.
And I like the fact that you didn't push him to the fore just because he was this guy, because I'm saying, we're all looking for representation, right, when we're reading books, and queer representation is now the big noise in the literature space, especially in characters, right? And I think there would be a temptation to want this character to play such a prominent role, especially if you do have a queer character. However, I do think that if you feel like you haven't been seen in the world for a long time, and especially in spaces like literature, that when somebody does see you, you don't want them to literally shine a spotlight on you. You want them to say you belong. It's not like now we must make a big fuss because you are different in this scenario. You belong here. You are a natural element of our society, right? So I think that you, by making Kabaso the character that he was, that flowed easily. Even for me, I didn't feel like, oh my gosh, we need more of him because now there's queer representation, blah, blah. I felt like this could be anyone's brother. It could be anyone's son. It could be anyone's daughter. I mean, sorry, well, it could be anybody's sibling, right? It flowed.
friend, anyone's brother. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that was the point. Yeah, he really was just there. He was, and he was just him with all of, other than being queer, he was just him, like the way he is, you know. He was Uncle Koba. So yeah.
And then there's two last things that I want us to talk around. One of them is this idea of growing up and believing that a better life for us can only be found in the West, in anything Western. So it doesn't mean that you physically have to leave your country, your home, etc. But the fact that if we were paraded as the first kids to have learned English, let's say, for example, in front of the family, say the alphabet, say this, say that. But then if you're speaking your own language, it comes across as something else. Like everything that's Western has always been celebrated more than what we are as let's say millennials, right? And we naturally have those freedom fighter parents who took pride in the fact that look at what my children have become, and what the children have become has become very Western. Now you've taken your characters, you placed them in a Western society where they were not fulfilled. Only until they came back to their roots did they find the fulfillment, and did they manage to become in the true sense, right? As opposed to having become in the West. What was your motivation for that kind of theme in the book?
The book really, you know, overall from a macro perspective, is exploring the state of countries, a continent, families, post-colonization, right? So for me, I feel like that universal journey of post-independence, everyone is migrating, right? For whatever the reasons are, depending on whichever country it is. And then, you know, 30, 40 years later, where are we? You know, what effects has that had on generations that have followed? And what would happen if they returned? Which is where I think we are now, you know, in a way. So, you know, and it's been explored before on so many different beautiful levels, going to the West. But I do feel like going forward, we'll probably have more discussion about the West returning home. So it was just important I feel it reflects post-colonialization, again, in society and families, where we've come from, and perhaps where the dynamics might move us towards as we go forward. So, you know, I think we've always seen the story go that way, but what about the ones who do come back? What's that like? And what does it mean? And do they still have that burning question, that need for home? Do they, or do they not? So again, that's up to the reader to decide once they're done, but it was important to reflect that.
And towards the end of the book, I feel like the family is at a sort of crossroads, right? And I think the big thing, even throughout the book, but with more emphasis towards the end, is that life is about decisions, right? So the decisions that we make, they either free us or they bind us. And to have that theme not so upfront in your face, but to tie it up the way that you did at the end, makes one want to revisit these characters again and see the choices that they made. Say, for example, if Grandma Margaret had not decided to take her belongings and go look for Charles, if Charles had not decided, let me do A, B, and C, there wouldn't obviously be this family and there wouldn't be these characters. But the ripple effect of decisions in this book is something that is quite strong. And like I'm saying, there are when you decide not to speak to your brother for however many years, this is the consequence. When you decide that I'm going to embrace my queer brother, this is the consequence. When I decide that, okay, my father, even though I don't understand him, I'm still his child, I'm still going to be present for all his whatever needs, this is the consequence. And I think that with navigating life, a lot of us, like I was saying about the generational impact of strong women in your society, we are not consciously aware of the fact that if today I decide to do this might have this kind of impact in later life. And now bringing it back to the political landscape at that time, do you think that freedom fighters had a choice in the way that they navigated life under those climates? And could their lives of their children have been any different in a better way had they not chosen to fight for freedom?
Oh, that is, again, your questions are so loaded, man.
I'm sorry.
Look, I think, it really honestly was a question of principle in that time. I mean, look, I can't say that for everybody,
Yeah.
but from the context of this book, I will talk from the point of view of those who, by principle, said, if I don't get up and fight, if I don't get up and say something, I don't know what will happen for the generations to come. Already the motivation was the generations that are coming. I'll say the same thing for those who maybe were not freedom fighters but migrated. So I'm coming from the point of view that of maybe Maggie's grandmother, who was a Windrush grandmother, right? She needed to migrate. She was looking for something better, not just for herself, but for her kids and the kids' kids. So again, I love that you pick that it's about choices. And I think I read somewhere or heard somewhere that we're all a result of events and choices, that have been made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before us. And I was trying to reflect that. So the fact that you pick that as the heart or the crux of the story is really heartwarming. Do I things would have turned out different? I don't think we'll ever know. But do I think they needed to do what they had to do when they did? I think yes, they did. So, perhaps on the individual kids or families, there were ripple effects, but in the long term, I think they got what they wanted, what we needed. And did it stop there? I don't think so. I think that was just the beginning of what all of us should be taking up going forward in the context of our time that is coming. So, I for this one, I'll stand up for them and say they had to do what they had to do. And I'm thankful that they did.
Definitely. And thank you so much for your time again, Tash. We're going into the segment where you're going to recommend some books to us before we wrap.
Thank you so much.
So I had said 3 books that you would recommend to us, right? So the first book that I'm going to ask for you to recommend is the first book you remember that transformed your life in any way. Remember?
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was really hard to answer because there are many books that transformed my life in many ways. But I will still very comfortably say Half of a Yellow Sun. And that is because I still remember just reading that book and realizing I could read a whole novel, right? And it's all set at home. Like it's just home-based. It's teaching me something. I'm immersed in these characters. It's, and because I think I've never been the same since. I read a lot of literature, but a lot of African literature, I slant there. And I think that put me on that course and even actually made me hunger home stories that much more. So I can never take away from that one. And I'll always say that for Half of a Yellow Sun.
And my favorite character there was I don't know the boy that helped in the house. I forget his name.
Was Uju? Was he Uju?
Yes, yes. I think so. That
Yes.
was my favorite character. Okay, so the second book is the first noteworthy book you read written by someone like you. So somebody who either they looked like you or had a similar existence to you, someone that could say, you know what, you can also be this person.
Okay. So I am still in awe with Homegoing. I know, some people say, I don't know, some people say no. Me, I'm still in awe because I don't know if she looks like me but I was like, wow, she's only 24. I think she was 24 when she wrote it. She's Ghanaian American. But the fact that she was able to get 14 character stories over 400 years in such a tightly woven book, for me, I'm still trying to figure out. So unless someone else can figure it out, please come and tell me. But until then, I think that was really noteworthy. I was immersed from the first page to the last. And I remember buying it in Joburg and flying to Lusaka I think I was almost done. Like by the end of the weekend, I think it was a Friday or something. But that book hasn't left me, and I think it really is tremendous what she managed to do with such a wide space of time, and managed to compress that. That was incredible.
Mhm. The two books that you've mentioned, sorry, not Half of a Yellow Sun, but The Death of Vivek Oji and as well as Homegoing are actually on my list of books to read this month. So you're making me very excited. I'm like, this is
Going to
good.
enjoy. You're going to enjoy them. I mean, it's like both of them take you on such a literary high.
Yeah, I'm ready for it. I am. And so the last book that I asked you to talk about is a book that you would recommend until your dying day, a book that you don't care who it is that you're talking to, you know that if they pick this book up, they will be happy because they encountered what you encountered in that book. Or transformed, not to say happy, but something will happen to them because they pick it up.
Wow. Okay. And I think you're being really unfair because on this one you should have been like at least like 10, right? And I would have like 25.
I'll give you two at the most.
Really, really good coming out, you know. But because you talk about such a timeless space and also impact. I once read when I was about 15 a book called The Three Daughters of China, written by Yang Chang, and it's written about three generations, starting from the grandmother to the mother to the daughter. So definitely, I love historical fiction, and now I'm starting to realize that I like sagas, because now when you're asking me this, then I'm thinking and I'm like, saga, okay, saga. I didn't realize that before. Even Death of Vivek Oji is a saga in its own way, sort of like a combination of saga and mystery. But I would say Yang Chang, that book for me, it starts in the Chinese dynasty with her grandmother and then goes into the communist with her mother, and then, sort of like the new China. And I really do love books that explore both like the, things at a micro level, but also how the macro level sort of ripple effects down to family and individuals and people. So that book for me, I think I was going, wow, like I could, and again, I was 15. I was, and to think, and it was that big. And I remember I couldn't put it down. Like the whole of, I think it was term 3, which is a hot term. I just remember reading whenever I could. So books like that, which can take you back and still trace, blood and country and history and earth and everything in between, for me always will be would be more impactful. But you said 2, hey.
Yes, I said you can have a second one. That one sounds very fascinating, by the way, because I believe that as people, we want to hear about other people. We want to read about other people. We don't really necessarily want to read about philosophies and ideologies. We want to see how these things impact people on a day-to-day living in the world, right? So if you can show me, because I'm also noticing that you like generational, maybe that's what you mean by saga as well, like generational embedded type of stories. And that is very important because it goes back to this idea of choice, right? So what I do today will impact my children for sure, but it will definitely impact their children and the generations to come. And I think that sometimes we think in our little bubbles of isolation, and we think that the world is happening to us and we're the first ones to experience whatever this is, whereas it is a combination, like you're saying, of events and decisions that those who came before us had made.
Absolutely.
So the second one?
Oh my Lord, the second one, it's really hard to think of a second one because
that's why you should stick to one.
I know. I think let me leave those 3 as they are. I'll leave them as they are. But I hope if we ever have another interview, I'll be ready. With but, I definitely read very widely, and I think that especially on the continent, we have amazing writers work coming out.
Yeah.
So, I want to still give a shout out to, my friends out with Remy Njamige. I've got Mobanga Kalimamukwento, Maza Mengisi, Zikiso Vanner, the whole Afrolit, the society, everybody, they're all working really, really hard to bring meaningful, content and entertainment to you guys. So I just want to give a shout of solidarity to everyone who's working hard on the stories and the research and yeah, it's not easy.
And thank you very much, because it actually does show, like, these are names that we know also though, but it's authors whose books, when we do encounter them as the community of readers, we can tell that this is not somebody who wrote for the sake of I want to write. This is somebody who was very intentional about their craft, and it shows. So we see them and we also appreciate them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Tash, and for spending time on turning pages. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you. And I can't wait to see you keep growing. I mean, I love how organic the growth is. We're going to different platforms. It's amazing. And your insight is so keen and thoughtful. So thank you very much. Also, as the author of No Be From Hia, for someone who read it, thank you so much. It means a lot. Thank you.
That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please don't forget to rate and review this podcast. Any engagement on any of my platforms means a lot to me. And until next time, remember, every page turned is something learned. Keep turning pages. I'd love to hear your thoughts about today's episode, so why not search for me on social media? On Instagram, I'm Vena_reads. On Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, I'm Vena_reads. And you can also find me on my website, which is www.vuvuvenareads.com. And until next week, I really do love you guys. Bye now.